When the whole earth begins coming together, including once upon a time faraway places like Africa and China, there's a tendency to believe that we um, can find essential ideas that um, make us sustainable and helpful and interactive to one another. This laudable goal is pursued by the United Nations and their um, human rights campaigns, and we also see that it doesn't always work out. Now, there's some overly tolerant, seemingly enlightened views about Russia in the Ukraine that raise questions about what has happened to us psychologically and morally in our attempts to integrate ourselves into Africa and Africa to be influenced by us on some basis other than caustic self-interest. Well, it's very difficult to change the difference of opinion that exists between people who believe in a win-win economic situation with sustainable development goals and geopolitical forces who believe that it's either win or lose in terms of domination. And we need to understand the psychology of the problem that we're dealing with, which comes in part from military sociology. Now, I come from a city of Pittsburgh, which is a very large and important city academically and socially and in terms of history, and brutal truths about American society and class warfare. I also come from a particularly interesting setting in Pittsburgh where some intellectual giants were caught robbing the museums of $6 million, which does in fact implicate Donald Trump, if you know the details, but the police aren't looking into it on that level, although they should be. One of the things that I know is that there are Holocaust survivors in the neighborhood I grew up in, one of whom I had a public dispute about childhood education with, named David Wecht. Ayn Rand depicts a scene between two men, and one of them says that the most terrifying thing he can imagine is being locked in a room with a beast of prey. And you would say the most sublime things in the world, but it would still look at you drooling with a purpose of malice all its own. Well, David Wecht believes that children should be taught young the horrifying traumas of Auschwitz. And, they tortured me so brutally in what they called special education, which they consider to be part of the special relationship Israel enjoys, that they can subject a child to deafness and torture and fear beyond fear. And then, well, if you know Trump and Ringo Starr, you know by now that when they accuse somebody of something, it means it's something that they're doing. And they want to test the power of law enforcement. Tulsi Gabbard makes an inane defense of Trump's overthrow of the U.S. Constitution, saying that it's a forfeiture of the awesome responsibility of the Federal Reserve, the federal system, to protect itself from overthrow. It's inane. Well, Donald Trump and Ringo Starr claimed backwards that I was prying gold caps off people's teeth when they did that to me. And the idea is that if you can get money for gold, it's therefore legal. It's legal for them to do this to somebody. And, we know that the Nazis made off with suitcases of gold teeth. And they're claiming basically that that's the nature of reality at the University of Pittsburgh. It's an exterminator mentality. They stacked up questions upon questions, postdoctoral dissertations of questions. And Lenin pulled a Houdini. Means he stepped out for this big dissertation, which was a defense of Hitlernomics. Hitlernomics doesn't get any attention because of the facilitators in the Bar Association, for one thing. They just torture somebody and throw a little sex at them. Police in Nazi Germany were the same way. They didn't want to intervene to protect the public. You know, they say might makes right. Well, that explains why our grannies just got kicked out of Kirkland. You know, they're refusing to dignify. The point of all of this is that it's the opposite of respectable. When you get questions upon questions upon questions, remember that Hitler said to discard everything that wasn't essential. That's what they're getting at. They're boiling things down to the paradigm, to the man with a bullet being told the bullet is worth more than the victim. And he has his mystical moment. The bullet is worth more than the victim. It would be a waste to shoot the victim, because metals were scarce at the time. But this is what David Wecht wants everyone to understand by hook and by crook, through torture and lunacy, that the bullet is worth more than the victim. It's an insane and asinine, retarded psychopathy that they want everybody to goose step to. All or nothing was, you know, and they just go about trying to make a monkey of someone. Now, there's something irregular about the way people call Uncle Tom someone to despise. In Uncle Tom's Cabin, he says, "You may own my body, but you don't own my soul." And he says, "I'll never be reduced to flogging another human being." He refuses to whip another slave. He says, "I'll never be reduced to that level." Now, that was Gandhi, that full pretended Gandhi. Gandhi wasn't an Uncle Tom. He resisted. He freed India. Well, these people don't want to buy that. So what they do is they make a monkey out of Uncle Tom. They say, "We'll invade your soul, neuroplasm, and change you from within." And this horrifying psychopathy that refuses to dignify nonviolence triumphs of the will at the University of Pittsburgh in the form of a bizarre museum theft ring. So, and it's facilitated by the law school. It's facilitated by Louis Lapham. What it boils down to is a theme of theory and philosophy of contemptuousness. If you look at contemptuousness into the mind of Russia, they say we're contemptuous of the claims made by NATO. Granted, that's understandable. But Putin used the words common ground, which was reaching out to Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition. I think he should be reminded that Martin Luther King was part of the movement that Jesse Jackson emerged from. He was arguably the leader of the movement. Now, I know from Pittsburgh that Martin Luther King was considered a thithy, and so contemptuousness for nonviolence, for the rights of the dignity of the elderly, for the rights of children to go to school unmolested, free of the special relationship and special education of David Wecht, is considered thithy. I saw a Japanese film where a kid didn't like fighting, and his own mother was encouraging the boys to humiliate him. So we know the contemptuous for nonviolence runs deep and thick. But one of the things we know about the contemptuous for nonviolence is it's shared by the people who pulled this. I used to have notebooks about how contemptuous people like Miles Kirshner were of what I called the epistemology of the Beatles. Guess who took his side? Ringo Starr and Trumpy took his side. So Ringo Starr, and this conforms with King Crimson too. Anyone who admires them, they think has been a subhuman. Roger Waters brags of spitting on one of his fans. Literally, he does. So they just have this idea that, when you hate on nonviolence, you go on a whole hog, go on a whole spree to hate nonviolence, heap contempt on it. Now, they castrated me, it's horrible, and gave me Parkinson's because I failed to what, in my opinion, but not in theirs, would have been date rape of Leslie Katz. I didn't do it, I refused to. And I protested the assignment. And they said, well, you're the type to whine about Tess. Well, they got revenge on Tess. Woody Allen used to say he didn't want to belong to a club that would have someone like him as a member. And that's the way the women feel about people who don't date rape them, evidently, if Toya Wilcox is to be believed. So contemptuousness runs thick and heavy through the so-called black belt of feminism that Midori Goto unleashed as an explanation for giving people HIV as a form of murder weapon. And Spike Oldley was contemptuous of my investigation, which was just about freedom of association. Pornography isn't about anything but freedom of association. You're free to associate with people. People sleep around, they sleep around. Well, I called it the thinning. Well, we were in for some more thinning with COVID-19. Nobody did anything to try to intervene. It's because the editorial establishment can't keep up with its assignment of telling the truth, while our legal bar associations are busy weaponizing legal obscurity to prevent any kind of investigation of cold-blooded, heartless, mass-approved personal aggression by the criminally insane of a little deaf boy. And they use people like me as pawns in their ideological media presentation, pulling little fast ones like love is a state crime, or lithium is a restricted element, expensive and difficult to obtain, and promoting a black woman in diva as the high citizen of the ARC in the German Green Party's explanation for Hitlernomics. And then Putin starts talking about common ground without a word of validation for the meaning of Martin Luther King's distinguished career. Well, Einstein said as he moved away from a clock, if I was moving at the speed of light, time would stop. I would be moving away, time would stop because the second hand would never reach the next second. Well, when you have these kinds of, he was in the Masons. So evidently was Houdini. They were contemporaries orbiting each other around Europe. When you start getting into Einstein and Houdini, you see the way that Lenin pulled this high-minded farce of the idea of drumming up pure hatred for public schools and safety in public schools. By agreement of Pittsburgh's churches, they allowed a girl who could recite all of the welfare state laws, working for a giant pornographic institution and the police department, to waylay a battered deaf child in trauma and recite these ideas so that it was implanted for a lifelong argument with David Wecht and his minions. You can't get much more dishonest or disordered. And they claimed, Yoko Ono claimed that they had a curse of little lies implanted in the little liar, who she blamed for Hiroshima with the help of King Crimson and Tulsi Gabbard, who is indexed to the bizarre idea that pulling out too fast in consensual lovemaking is a form of defiant trespass. So these are overly tolerant, enlightened views because they're inane, and they call for an aristocracy of self-discipline. The idea behind the planning of, only allow puppies you want to give birth to puppies, no more litters, is the idea of an aristocracy of self-discipline. They set it up as a roster of things that Jimmy Queerbait, as they called me, would cry in remorse to discover were his by status because he belonged to Bush's ship in the Navy. Ha 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 ha. Well, that's what Gail Burstyn was crowing about when she said, everything about you is so much of a status symbol. It was status symbol enough to attract the interest of British opium warriors. Now, Russia has a wild card status that leaves a little bit to be desired when it comes to their Machiavellianism. When they make a monkey of a person who's just trying to fulfill the claim of dignity and nonviolence, the claim that we have legal systems that work out the differences between us as a matter of public safety and self-respect. And they jump me with this grinding culture theories that we got an abortion out of you because they scored an ugly abortion on me. And we'll give you the Gandhi solution, which is weep, 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 weep. Now go give everything to the familiar who is here today. So they set up Greta to come as Rita Meter Maid, and their idea of the status quo answer to being brutalized by David Weckman as thuggees. And of course, I do care a great deal about Greta Thunberg. People have an aptitude. When it came to Jeannie Tamburo, she was set up upon the East-West circuit. She, like me, has traumatic brain injury from whatever culture she grew up in during the Korean War, or grew up from the Korean War, within whatever culture endured the Korean War, I should say. She was East-West circuit who knew sign language by Von Itkin and Arnold's daughter Leslie, who set this whole thing up. And they were right. I fell for Jeannie Tamburo. She became my best friend, made it possible for me to learn sign language. Caspar Weinberger studied mental retardation, as it was once called. And they knew what they were doing. Her name was Chinny. Greg Carl talks about the personas that do a bewildering myriad of surface details. Not by the hair on my chinny chin. So what they want is, they believe, I don't want to blame Dugan, because he can speak for himself. But I know Carl wrote a poem called World of Ash, and Bly Sanders talked about filming the end of the earth. Some of these assholes believe that man was put here to end the world, not to be shepherds of the beasts and animals and learn and have decent public schools. And these assholes have gotten the upper hand through Access Hollywood, and they want to put themselves in your face and said, fight me or you go down as a wussy. And that's the absolute judgment on the entire meaning of existence. And they don't believe that the bullet is worth more than the victim. And what are you going to do about it, dog eyes? What are you going to do about it? And we're supposed to regard that as respectable. It's not respectable. And I don't know that Putin isn't reacting against that because my experience comes from NATO. But don't put me in the same camp as people who invade a sovereign nation and misdirect comments to lure out friends of Martin Luther King when they have no respect for the meaning of nonviolence. There was a catch-all that came from these sadists in the Bar Association, the media, who were facilitating this government of criminal insanity. They're facilitating it. They said, well, we'd like to work things out, but the boys want to fight right now. I can imagine they do, seeing what they've been caught with their pants down about.